Okay, we're leaving the shores. We're leaving our coal harbor, and this ship now is being transited out and around the other side of Vancouver Island with the tugs, with the pilots, with some safety, and with the double hulls, with the new technology, etc. They're out there and they're on their way. Ain't it worth it? If we can get that done, isn't it worth it? On the left.
I would argue that when you look at the analysis of let's just take the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, one of the leading, most respected economic institutions in the world, or Robin Allen, the CEO, former CEO of ICBC, in her very thorough independent economic analysis. This idea of the Dutch disease is not some pie-in-the-sky notion. This is supported by some of the top economic minds and institutions in the world. So the question has to be asked...
Can you define Dutch disease for those of us
The Dutch disease is the problem of tying a country's economy and currency to petroleum, basically, or any other resource. It was gas in Amsterdam, is where the term comes from. But what you see is an artificially inflated currency, which hinders exports of other products. So
now connect that to that ship.
Well, you're talking about, is it worth it? Is it worth it, us becoming a major exporter of tar sands bitumen to the global marketplace? And I would submit that there's some very thorough and considered economic analysis that has poked a lot of holes in that and suggests that the job losses we're seeing in Ontario and the manufacturing sector are directly tied to our movement to become a major global oil superpower that is the vision of Stephen Harper. Once you're in the harbor and you're talking about the flip side of that, is the risk of a spill outside of, or I should say, on the coastal waters. And we're talking about the estuary of the most important salmon run in our province. We're talking about also the core of our farmland that feeds us here, the best farmland in North America in the Fraser River Delta. We're talking about the Pacific Flyway with 5 million migratory birds, and we're talking about the economic and cultural, heart of our province. So you're talking about the Gulf Islands, you're talking about the Sunshine Coast, you're talking about the Victoria, our capital. All of these things are in serious risk of a spill, and the risk level it continues as you move away from the harbor. So we can't. We have to apply the same sort of risk versus reward. Cost versus benefit analysis. And I would say, once again, what we're talking about here is a handful of jobs in the Vancouver port. We hear from Enbridge, it'd be 35 in the Port of Kitimat from that project. It's a similar size deal, and we're putting at risk 50,000 wilderness tourism jobs, our salmon economy, our entire tourism economy.
That's 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes. I'll give Tzeporah 30 seconds. I'll give Tzeporah 30 seconds and add the 30 for these guys too. They'll get 2:30. So you got 30 seconds?
Again, I think we need to look at, who benefits here. And the fact is it worth it for Shell? Is it worth it for Chevron? Absolutely. These are the most profitable companies on the planet. Shell made $1 billion last month. Is it worth it for British Columbia? The risk is high. We don't see a lot of those profits. And can we actually reduce demand for oil? Can we actually move to new technologies so that we don't have to rely on risky and unsafe forms of energy? Yes, and the world is already doing it. We have the technology today to move to a renewable energy system, electrification of our transport, and better transit systems. But the oil industry is not just feeding global demand, they're creating global demand. And as long as we're going to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure and major fossil fuel developments like the oil sands, then we will not actually be moving away towards a low-carbon economy.
We're going to get to oil sands. The question was in the ocean, and the question was about technology for you lads. Basically, that some people say that technology does not stop accidents, and of course we know that the human error, which you've recognized as captain of the Valdez, or that fine Italian captain sailing by to see his mistress. It happens. But if technology gets us safer, can technology get us safer and guaranteed to be safe out past Vancouver Island so that this material can sail and can help produce a different economy in this country?
Well, I want to start with your question about is it worth it? And it kind of takes you to what are the drivers for this project. So it was mentioned earlier that Chevron is having trouble getting supply for their refinery. That's because the pipeline is oversubscribed. So our existing pipeline typically receives... it typically receives requests for 70% more capacity than is available. And the rules that we have to operate under the National Energy Board is we have to provide fair access to all those that want to ship oil in the pipeline. And so that's one of the reasons that Chevron is in the news lately. And that demand for pipeline space, that oversubscription of pipeline capacity, is driven today because there's probably between $20 and $30 a barrel difference in the price of oil in the international market. It's $20 to $30 higher than what it is in the continental U.S. And the pipeline infrastructure in North America is basically built south and east to feed the U.S. market. And today, Trans Mountain is the only pipeline that supplies, is the only access for the Canadian production to meet, to access those international markets. And so that's a big driver. And it's not just because of that differential. Those differentials come and go. The one that I'm talking about has been in place for several years now, and it drives the demand for the pipe space that we have now. But that diversity is really what's important. So today, Canada is the third largest, we have the third largest reserves in the world for oil. And unlike all the other countries that have large reserves of oil, we only have the ability to trade with one market besides ourselves. And so that's a big piece of what this project is about trying to diversify the Canadian markets, giving producers another place to be able to sell their oil. And we'll talk about whether oil sands are good or bad and how things are being done there. And the improvements that are being made. But at the end of the day, if we're going to produce oil and we're going to trade commodities as Canadians, I think it's important that we be able to get the best price that we can for it.
Okay. A quick question, maybe Franz will answer this. The question was, if we can safely get those ships out into deep water, is it worth it? Does it make it absolutely worth it in your point of view?
Well, it's difficult to judge, let's say, from the overall economic perspective. So I will just look at it from a technical perspective. Most of the incidents we see around the globe in terms of ships accidents will be in the coastline. So you need to hit something before you get into trouble. So the main aspect that we should focus on here in British Columbia is getting those ships out to sea. And those ships are pretty well equipped to sail the seas because that's what they're being built for. So yeah, when a ship comes into a shore where they'll need to be welcomed by pilots that know the terrain, and also by tugs that can steer them through wherever there might be a nautical danger.
My understanding is that both Transport Canada and the industry defines success of a cleanup of an oil spill as somewhere between 10 and 15%. And I think it's important that the public realize that that is how the industry and the government define success. And that still leaves, and in many cases we have examples, 85% of a toxic substance left in our environment.
Your response?
Yes, and those figures are right. You're going to get 15% of a spill recovered. There's no two ways about it. That's why not having it is the best thing to do. No one is denying not having the spill is the best thing to do. No one is denying that there is an inherent risk. But again, I will start to be a little philosophical now. What are we going to do if we don't have oil coming into Vancouver right now and for the next 15 years? Surely it's better to recognize that it's a few years yet before technology will put us in a position where we can really wean ourselves off carbon fuels. So how can we ensure that we do it as safely as possible? We should look at it also from a global perspective. Is it better to take oil and move it around the world from a country that is known around the world for its democracy and actually has meetings like this?
Except when it comes to oil issues.
Has meetings like this where people can discuss it? Or is it better to go from a part of the world where these meetings don't happen? Women are treated as second-class citizens. Other horrible things happen. I'm sorry, but this is the kind of stuff that gets thrown at it. The bottom line is, we need oil. The question is, how do we move it safely? The third question is Vancouver a safe place for moving oil? What I will say is Trans Mountain has proved itself to be so.
Okay. One answer from you guys, and we got to move on.
I stumbled across this video from 1956. I encourage you to go on Google. Bechtel Trans Mountain Pipeline. This was the promotional video selling the project. You know what the reason that was told to the public for building the Trans Mountain Pipeline 56 years ago was to get Vancouver off of oil tanker traffic. It was because we didn't have a local supply, and we recognized that it didn't make a heck of a lot of sense to take extra risk and cost to bring our oil and refined products in through our harbor that way. And now what we're doing is a complete inverse of that. We have enough capacity here, more than enough to supply our local needs, drawing on local refinery capacity in Washington State and Vancouver. We have 300,000 barrels a day, but these guys want to export 80% of that to foreign markets. So don't tell me that this is about where we have to import it from around the world or from Saudi Arabia or other countries, because we have it right here, and that's not the direction that we're going in. It's a complete misrepresentation of the plan here at hand.
Okay. I'm going to go past the issue of the oil sands. We've kind of dealt with it, and it will be dealt with in some questions, but we've got 15 minutes, and I want to move forward with some of the questions that you guys have asked. These questions came in with your applications when you signed up for this meeting. Here's a question, and please, one person from each panel. What financial responsibility would the pipeline and oil companies bear if there was a spill from a tanker in our harbor? It may have been answered, but I'd like to clear it up. So what financial responsibility goes to the pipeline and oil company if there's a spill?
That's a really good question.
I thought so.
I will give my best
Somebody out there
insights
did it.
as somebody who has tried to get answers to this. The best answers I have are, in terms of a spill on land, we know that the BC government has acknowledged that companies, there is not enough coverage. And we know that, for example, with the Kalamazoo spill, the Enbridge Kalamazoo spill in Michigan, their liability limit for a land-based spill was something in the range of $600 million, I think it was. And the spill is now well exceeded that. So we know that the BC government has made clear that we will be looking at local residents, citizens, businesses, and taxpayers to help shoulder the burden of local cleanup costs. In terms of spills on water, we've also talked about that. The limit in Canada with the combination of funds that are available that you've described quite well is about $1.3 billion, and that may not be enough depending on the scale and scope of any spill.
Okay, Michael? Anything else?
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to add on the marine side. It's described the liability regime. The ships have insurance. There's an international fund and a Canadian fund to draw upon, total about $1.3 billion. And there's mechanisms in place to change that if that was needed. On the pipeline side, the province's report, I think it's meant to speak quite broadly. Trans Mountain, we will take responsibility for a problem on our pipeline. We carry insurance, and I think we've proven over the 60 years to be a responsible operator. If there's a spill, we will clean it up.
The second question is, if there was more refining capacity on the Alberta side, and it was not diluted bitumen that was coming down, they were more finished products, which I'm not too sure even how to name, but gasoline and all the leans. Would this change your view of the subject because of not having diluted bitumen coming through those pipes and onto those ships?
Can I take that? Okay.
You go ahead. If you...
I think the fact is that this gets back to the issue of whether or not we're going to be expanding fossil fuel development in the country and whether or not what's happening in the tar sands is okay. First of all, what we need to understand when we start looking more at domestic refining in Canada is that because bitumen is such a toxic substance, the refinery impact is very severe on small communities. And we only have to look as far as the case this year in Chicago, where BP was applying to change their refinery so that they could bring in tar sands oil. And the Sierra Club in the U.S. and NRDC launched a court case. They won that court case, and in fact, BP now has to pay $300 million in upgrades to those refineries just to protect the community because of the toxic impacts. The fact is that the oil sands are the single largest and dirtiest industrial project on Earth, and whether or not we have domestic refining, we face a choice as a country as to whether we want to expand this development. And when we start talking about whether or not this is ethical or whether or not we should expand it, we need to look at what's happening, not just in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the oil sands are the single largest reason that Canada's emissions are going up and not down. We also need to look at the toxic impact. So we're told that it's some of the toughest laws in the world. Yet there are no laws governing the most toxic substances from the oil sands, which is naphthenic acids. There are no regulations. And right now we are pumping 300 million liters a day of toxic sludge into open pits in the center of Canada that are now 170 square kilometers of toxic pits.
The question for the lads on the right then was, if the refining was done on the east side of the mountains, would this change this project if we were sending more refined products through the pipe?
Well, I think from a pipeline point of view, we're indifferent. If there was to be an expansion of refinery capacity, and that was to meet the demand of markets, to meet the diversity intention of the project, you'd still need a pipeline to move it. So whether it's going to be moved as diluted bitumen or whether it's removed as refined products, you'd still need a pipeline to take it to market.
Captain, does it change the public discourse or public argument if there are more refined products, you think, rather than this heavy goop going through?
I don't know. I think there's, again, a little bit of misinformation happening about refined products versus non-refined or crude oil. I mean, one of the things I heard someone, I think it was a politician, say the other day, well, they much prefer to have gasoline in the tankers because it evaporates very, very quickly. The fact of the matter is, if you have a gasoline spill, we talked about the low amount of recovery for a crude oil spill. For a gasoline spill, there's no recovery. It's gone. And I don't know what the impact is of that on the water or on the air or even on the responders to that particular incident. So I think what we need to again get back to is that the fact, the basis of it is are we going to be in the business of transporting oil, and whether it's refined oil or crude oil, we should treat both of them very, very seriously, and try and ensure in fact that we have the best checks and balances that are possible in place, and then continually monitor to make sure that we improve on those, and as Michael added earlier, and learn from other people's mistakes.
Okay, we're going to ask some questions from the audience.